Welcome to Medussa Muses, a mostly scripted podcast where we talk about various topics ranging from politics and popular media to spirituality and activism. I'm your host, Medussa Durand. For this inaugural episode, I would like to talk about the importance of Black representation in media and reparations for the Black community. First, let's talk about representation. There are two major reasons why Black representation is important to the Black community. The first is that Black people need hope. Everyone feels the pressure of trying to survive this capitalist hellscape. Seeing Black people in movies, on the news, or on social media can be uplifting for many people. In fact, during Black History Month, Black people get flooded with the acknowledgement of their history, though it's often not the whole history. I remember as a child learning about Martin Luther King Jr. as a civil rights leader and George Washington Carver as the guy who discovered many uses for peanuts. And that was dope. For the whole month, TV stations attempted to show all the movies they could find with Black people in it and bombarded us with them for views. It was energizing but overwhelming. Worse was the isolation I felt once the month was over. Because after the month was over, so was my visibility. Black people and all their accomplishments and struggles went back into the closet for next year. And as I grew up, it became abundantly clear that Black History Month wasn't about uplifting Black people, it was about throwing us a bone so that we couldn't complain about still being second-class citizens. At the time, a lot of the uplifting Black movies that were pushed on me were about young Black men from the hood with single mothers who end up making it out by surviving gang violence and getting an education. If it wasn't that, then it was movies about slaves escaping their white masters or withstanding years of abuse just to finally be freed. And the schools kept teaching us about the same 3 Black men and Rosa Parks. However, this brings me to the other reason why Black representation is important. White people get all their impressions of us from media. In fact, our media is written with them as the sole demographic. It caters to the white gaze, always wanting to evoke positive feelings in the audience. That's why slave movies typically don't end in bloody revolts, but with peaceful resolution. That's why in school I was taught about MLK Jr. and not Angela Davis and the Black Panthers. Real Black history is uncomfortable for white people to think about, and as a result, the narratives of Black people are controlled through mainstreaming and commercialization of Black History Month. Even though it's supposed to be a month devoted to uplifting and celebrating Black voices, this month does anything but that. Instead, this month is used as a sort of training month for white people to paint over their white supremacist upbringing with woke language and to pretend that they understand Black people because they saw some movie that made them understand how tough life is for Black people growing up in the hood, because of course it's the hood. That's why it's more important that we have quality representation in media. This means not accepting stereotypes from lazy writers and not applauding people for just having Black people in traditionally white roles or sets. We're already everywhere. Why applaud anyone for being realistic? That's why we need more Black people creating media. Whether they make Black movies or not, it's important to see Black people being able to live their lives and pursue their passions. Though I lament the quality of the Black media I consumed as a child, I'll admit that it still had a positive effect on me. It inspired me to want to create something as a Black person and show the world that I, as a Black person, existed and could do things too. Fortunately, the newer films, comics, and shows are better written and provide more validating perspectives than the ones I grew up with. This gives me some hope that Black youths will be uplifted and inspired in a healthier way than I was. I already know this to be somewhat true because natural hair is becoming more prominent and beloved by Black women and femmes. There's also a rejection of European Western beauty standards. Though what I'm most excited about is more Black queer representation that's outside of the sassy lesbian or the gay queen. I'm also loving the end of using Black queer people as a lesson for white people to stop fearing Black people by putting us in friend roles or making us villains to stoke their homophobia and contribute to the sensual savage stereotype. But that's for another episode. We're talking about representation. I am super hopeful with all the new media I've seen having Black people doing more than sell drugs, get beaten by police, and be enslaved by white colonizers. Hell, I even enjoy Black Panther, and after the movie came out, I was one of those people vibing with Wakanda forever. But representation only gets a Black person so far in America. That's why reparations are essential to the conversation, and I'll tell you more about it after this brief message. Sorry to interrupt myself, but I just need to ask, are you enjoying this episode? If so, then do head to patreon.com/Medussa Muse and become a $2 patron today. Receive updates about production or other projects that I may get into, as well as early access to the pod's latest episodes. If that's too much and you just want to leave me a tip, buy me a coffee at ko-fi.com/Medussa Muse. That's ko-fi.com/Medussa Muse. I now return you to your lovely hostess. Representation gives Black people hope and makes us feel seen. It's an encouraging force, especially when it's positive and validating. But it's simply not enough to show us that we can exist or prosper in society. The truth is that the bonds of slavery and Jim Crow segregation still weigh us all down. Many white people forget that the first civil rights movement was only 50 years ago, and people who were children then are fully grown adults and even elderly at this point. And it's unreasonable for anyone to expect Black people to bounce back from over 350 years of slavery, segregation, sterilization, redlining, over-policing, and gentrification. Yet there are many individuals who proclaim that it's all Black people's fault for not pulling themselves out of their horrific situations. The truth is that we cannot individually fix the effects on our communities by centuries of systematic genocide. The only way that we as a community will be able to unshackle ourselves is if we organize our communities and demand reparations from the institution that continues to oppress us. But what are reparations? Following slavery, reparations took the form of seizing slave owners' properties and redistributing these lands so that these freed men and women could have shelter and a means to make money. However, before the process could be completed, Andrew Jackson took office and returned all that land that was seized and redistributed back to slave owners and their families. Ever since, reparations have been framed as a broken promise made by the government under the code 40 acres and a mule. And every time someone tries to have a productive conversation about what reparations should look like, this phrase is thrown up as if it's relevant. One thing about reparations is that it's supposed to make those who were harmed whole or reverse the harm done. That means that reparations that have been delayed for centuries must look different from the reparations that would have made our ancestors whole. Instead, we must look to reparations that would make us whole. Black ancestors were made homeless, with no way to care for themselves without being preyed on by white opportunists. Giving them land in the South, where agriculture was the main way to establish income, was an effective way to make them whole. Today, Black communities are plagued by poverty, over-policing, bad infrastructure, gentrification, predatory businesses, and lack of accessibility to healthcare and food. Not to mention, the school-to-prison pipeline and the prison industrial complex are also contributing to the continued genocide of Black people. Reparations will have to account for all of that and be doled out on a systematic level. And I will tell you more about it after this short message. Pardon me, but you look like you wanted to say something. It's my show, but would you like to be a part of it? If you're not listening to this on Anchor, head over to anchor.fm/Medussa-musing. Once you're there, leave me a message after you finish the episode. There's a button with the word on it to make it super easy. And who knows, maybe I'll address your message on the show. Before the break, we talked about how reparations are supposed to make harmed people whole, or reverse the harm done against them. We also discussed how reparations for modern Black people must be different from our ancestors, because of the reversal of the first attempt at reparations. It's also important that these new reparations accommodate the harm resulting from the failed reparations attempt, and the further harms caused by a multitude of racist legislation and systematic abuse contributing to the continued genocide of Black people. So, now, we ask ourselves, how do these new reparations look like? What are these harms, and can they be reversed or healed? Well, first, the harm done by the state's negligence and apathy towards Black lives have resulted in most of us being trapped in a cycle of systematic abuse and the slow, consistent eroding of our communities. Reparations must address these issues systematically while also giving Black people sovereignty over their communities. In other words, no monthly government payments, which they could revoke and cripple entire communities that would rely on them. In fact, a common misnomer for reparations is handouts for Black people. But that's not what reparations should be. After all, we live under capitalism, and giving a bunch of people money one time doesn't lift them out of poverty. It just provides them a momentary buffer before returning to poverty. It's important that we as Black people not accept any government handouts as reparations, but as initial payments towards actual reparations. Because true reparations would be setting up more polling stations, redrawing districts to counter years of gerrymandering, the ending of redlining, abolishing police from our communities, decriminalizing drugs, and making food and healthcare accessible for all. But it doesn't end there. Black people, we know what's wrong in our communities. We know what we are each individually lacking. If we organize our communities to fix communal problems, we can use our shared power to influence local government into listening to our needs. And it's okay if you don't know where to start, or if you're from a community that's alienated from each other. It's all part of the design that we don't necessarily have established community bonds, or organizations, or government. So start small. Talk to family members, church family, co-workers, or neighbors about what they think could improve the neighborhood. Ask established organizations like your church or soup kitchen if they have any projects that help people in the neighborhood, or if they would help you with a project that could help your neighborhood. Work with local recreation centers to see if you could use it for community building projects such as food drives, a community garden, or a support group. Don't forget to normalize political talk, because Black lives are political by default, and political ignorance is deadly for us. Make flyers to get people's attention about legislation that affects them, and the times that a local town hall or something like that is happening. Use pamphlets to inform people about the important details about this legislation or about local candidates. Make agitprop to post around the neighborhood, or make public art in places you're allowed to. Another important thing to do is for us Black people to support other Black people in the community, while also holding each other accountable. I'm not saying that we should call the police on each other, but when we see that someone is suffering at the hands of someone else in our community, it is a community problem, and we need to help them. This is part of the work we must do to exorcise generational trauma passed down from our slave ancestors from the oppressive conditions they were forced to live under. We really need each other. Like, I'm only talking to my Black people. We live with so much generational trauma that we just don't even understand, but we feel it when we talk to each other, when we accept treatment from one another that's not the best treatment because we know that we only have each other to survive from. We have those bonds, and those are important bonds to have. But at the same time, we can't keep living that way. We can't keep living in this way of, I love you, but I don't have to like you. We need to start loving and liking each other. Not like liking people who do you wrong, but we should make it to where we won't have to rely on them. We should improve the conditions to where we can help each other out. Even that person that we don't like, but we don't have to rely solely on certain people to survive. We need to strengthen our communities. We need to have each other's back. We need to not necessarily feel responsible for every little thing that happens, but we need to have more pride in our communities. We need to have more pride in one another. The white people do it all the time. It's our turn. We're gonna look out for each other. We're gonna hold each other accountable. We're gonna grow our communities. And that's what we're gonna do. So, let's be the change we need in our communities. Let's be our own artists, therapists, and leaders. The government has already shown that they do not value our lives. All summer, people hit the streets to protest the police murdering Black people during a pandemic that was already killing us in droves. Whenever we're represented, we're only sassy friends, magical advisors, sensual savages, street thugs, and redeemed villains. There will be no white saviors. We will have to roll up our sleeves and do as the radical Dr. King Jr. did in the first civil rights movement. We must come together as a united community and make our voices heard and use our collective power. And that's all I have to say on the matter this episode. I hope you learned a lot from this episode and have some engaging conversations about it. I hope you tune in next time when I talk about Black culture.